Alice Segura, Boynton, Alice's family, the Segura family, probably are the largest owners at Cheniere Tic, along with a few other families. But her experiences there and her connection with the relative that wrote the book is Zoe, was it Zoe or Zoe? Zoe. Zoe Lynch wrote a book about it. But anyway, let's let her get started.
Well, hi. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to do this presentation. Dick called and asked, and I said, well, you're calling me, the one who lived in Abbeville, you know. But I figured I was the only one he knew. So I had to go to my family then to find others to help me do this presentation, because certainly I needed some guidance in it too. But we have some tremendous sources I want to share with you. I think one of them's covered up here, yes. We have some books. This is called Louisiana Paradise. It's by Amanda Hanks. And she was it was a Segura, and she wrote this book, and it explains how the Chenieres came to be, and all of them. And then secondly, what it does is it gives us a look into World War II Louisiana, as she had sons in the Swamp Angels and things like this. Now, not Amanda, okay, but her mother did. Her brothers were in it. But it gives you it's a series of letters from mother to daughter or to mother to son or things like this. Very, very interesting, good definition of what a Cheniere is. Her sister, Zoe Lynch, wrote a book called My Memories of Cheniere Tic. And in this one, this is the daily life. It's got a wonderful set of chapters here where you can go anywhere in it that you want, and it's full of pictures, as is this one. This one has pictures too. And but this is the daily life, okay? And then of course I know that this group knows about this because this is your book, right? This is volume 1 of History of Vermilion Parish, of which there are 2 volumes, and this has a very good representation of not only the Segura family, because they weren't the only family out there. There were many others. But this has a very good background, and volume 2 I don't own yet. I know there are copies available. By the way, unfortunately this one is out of print. I think there's a copy in the library, but it is out of print. My Memoirs of Cheniere Tic is still in print, and it's available either from Nora, right here, Nora Lynch, or it's also available, where is it? Thibodeau's Feed Store, and at the Cultural Center in town, and the Depot. Okay, and of this now, of volume 1, most of us have one of these, and volume 2, this is no longer available. Volume 2 now is still available at the Cultural Center, I know for sure.
We actually do have some volume.
Oh, you have some volume 1 left?
A box.
Box was discovered. Yeah, that might make a good fundraising thing.
Yeah, I need to put them on.
We have more requests than we have copies.
But I have, for anyone who wants this is a bibliography of some of the sources that I just talked to you about. And then 2 sources I wasn't able to put my hands on. One of them, Cheniere Tic, An Island in the Marsh by Gerard Sellis. It was a DVD he did for LPB in 1985. And it's around, somebody has a copy of it, but I couldn't get my hands on an original to use portions of it for tonight. And also there's a young woman who did her thesis is on Cheniere. It's called The Tigre and the Oak, or Oaks. And again, I was not able, it's online somewhere, but I was not able to access it. So, but if anybody wants a bibliography of information on the subject, it's here. But I would recommend these books, definitely. There's also, okay, we'll get to this later. Let me start by saying that I'm using a quotation to start off, and it's a quotation from the Abbeville Original in 1982 when they did a whole issue dedicated to the history of Vermilion Parish. And they had many different things. They had things from Gaydon, Kaplan, all the areas. And they asked Gerard Sellis to do an article on Cheniere Tic, which he did, and because his father had been out there. And so there's a quotation in it I wanted to start with tonight. It's called, "It is hard to understand why any man or woman would seek a snake and alligator infested marsh in which to live." Now you know that has to be true if you've been out there. Okay, we're not even talking mosquitoes yet, okay? That was in this Abbeville original. But one has to take into consideration the Chenieres along the southwest Louisiana coast. The Chenieres were oases in the midst of sand and marsh. They were like islands in a sense, because there was no way to them except by boat. Coming in from the shore originally, and then later on from canals going south. So they were oases in this sand and marsh. There was high land, there was wood, game, and often fresh water. Bayous flowed to the Gulf of Mexico, where sailing boats of the time could come in. They could penetrate the Cheniere itself and get out of the roughness of being in the Gulf, and possibly get food and other things too. Along the coast, the ones most familiar to us are the Chenieres of Grand Cheniere, Mulberry, Pecan Island, Belle Isle, and Cheniere Tic. Now, they are not the only Chenieres, but they are the ones I think we are most familiar with. Some were on the coast itself like Cheniere, and some were inland like Pecan Island. Pecan Island was a Cheniere at one point in time. There was water lapping at the edge of it. How were these Chenieres created? Amanda Hanks, in her book Louisiana Paradise, notes that in prehistoric times, what is now southern Louisiana was submerged. Melting glaciers contributed to the deposit of sediment along there by rivers. Later, movements of the Earth's surface caused the sediment to be raised above sea level. The Mississippi River meandered for millennia and fed sediment in these low-lying areas. And it had no banks then, and so it didn't have any levees. And so this year it would go this year over here, and this year it would go over there. But it created enough land, and that when it receded, things began to grow. Okay? So there was not a continual washout. It was more and more and more added. This oft-repeated process resulted in the series of ridges known as Chenieres along the coastline. A Cheniere literally means a place where live oaks grow. Chen for oak, and Cheniere, islands, I don't know if that part is, but it's an oak island, as it were. And that's very noticeable when you go to these places. Now, in terms of settlers, the first settlers, of course, were Native Americans, okay? Along the coast of Louisiana, there was and is, in some cases, repeated discoveries of the presence of different groups of Native Americans. Among the most common in this area were the tribes of the Chitimacha and the Attakapaw. Now, some people, when they refer to the Indians, they just say the Attakapaw, because that's the one more widely known. But there was a variety of different tribes that came and went, because it was not an area where permanent settlements were, but there were temporary settlements, and then they moved on, and this sort of thing. Gertrude Segura Sire, right here, daughter of Lloyd and Ruby Segura, did some excavation in this area in 2 summers of her high school years, along with a group from USL, right?
Right.
Okay. She noted that while some were camp settings, some were ceremonial in nature. Many of us remember going to Pecan Island where those mounds were there. They were working on those very mounds. And
Those mounds were ceremonial mounds. We were working with an archaeologist from UL at the time, and we had permission from the, wow, you put me on the spot, I can't think of her name.
doesn't matter.
Anyway, we got permission to work on one mound, and there was a group from Harvard working on another mound. So we kind of ran over there and picked their brains and got as much information as we could about the area. Most of our information was recorded and sent to UL in their archives.
Okay, and it still is there, available if one wants to search enough. In terms of European settlers, as early as 1785, there were descriptions by Spanish explorers of a coastal area that matches the land along Southwest Pass and Freshwater Bayou. By 1806, there was evidence on a map of Cheniere Tic. Supposedly, early explorers landed and went exploring, leaving a young man about with the boat. They went about leaving a young man with the boat. When they returned to the boat, they found him mauled by some sort, this is the story, mauled by some sort of cat or cougar, hence the name Cheniere Tic, ridge of the tiger or cougar. Around 1815, Texans fleeing from the Spanish headed east to Louisiana. By 1836, more Texans had come to the coastal area, the war with Mexico. Among them was a Jacob Cole, and this is noted in Gerard Sellers' article, who came to Louisiana with cattle and looked for an area in which to raise them. Now, Gerard hints that he was not real happy with his home life, and so then decided to move as much as he could. His wife didn't really want to accompany him. At the time, Grand Chenier was the last settled area. With help, he pushed on to Pecan Island. He went back bringing pecans to the people, saying, yes, there is highland there. And eventually on to Mulberry, and then Cheniere Tic. Hippolyte Broussard was among the first of the settlers to permanently live there. Along with Broussard were names of settlers like Vaughan, White, Choate, Dyson, de France, or it's de France, I think it's pronounced. I don't know for a fact. Ditch, Tasco, Miller, Guidry, LeBlanc, Hildebrand, and others. And I'm sure I did not name all of them, or even some of the more prominent ones. Cheniere Tic was the highest of the Chenieres, with a height of about 12 feet in some places, okay? Other Chenieres were more at the 3 to 6 foot level in height. This particular Cheniere was and is bordered by marsh on 3 sides, and then the Gulf on the south side. By the 1840s, Cheniere was the home to about 25 to 28 families. Later came the Seguras and others. But more particular to the Seguras, Raphael Segura and Clara Martin were married in New Orleans and had 2 sons. One was named Raphael after his father. He was born in 1848, and Cesar, who was born in 1850 but didn't make it past his 8th year. He died then. Raphael, who was born in 1848, I'll call him Raphael Jr. Raphael Sr. was not very well, and somehow or other the family moved to Abbeville and had a place, I was told, located on one of the sides of the bayou by the old bridge. He did not do well, and he died. I think he was later buried in New Orleans. Clara remarried Germaine Laplace and had 4 more children before Laplace died. Before Laplace died. Okay, let me get back. Okay, I get the Raphael's kind of confused here. Young Raphael had tutors and attended for a time the Académie des États-Capos in Opelousas. Through the generosity of the Wise family, businessmen of Abbeville, Raphael attended Tulane Medical School in New Orleans and graduated in 1869. In 1878, he moved to Cheniere Tic with his mother and her children, where he taught school, practiced medicine, and farmed. In 1880, he married Alzina de France, but the marriage was very short in nature. And this is my page here. Where's my page? Excuse me a minute. I was starting the journey and I left the page out. Lasted only a few months. In 1890, he married Alice Anna White. This is her right here. The picture of her later. There are many Alices in our family as a result, as there are many Raphaels. She was 25 years younger than me. Wow. The story goes, okay, that I was told, that he was teaching school at Cheniere, and she was one of the younger White daughters, and the older sisters brought her to school, and he said, oh no, she's too young, she can't come in here yet. And that's who he ended up marrying. That's a story, I don't know. But they had 11 children before he died in 1910. And these are the children, the father and mother here. This is Raphael Sr., no, this is Raphael Jr., okay, and his wife, Alice Anna, and they're 10 of their 11 children. One daughter, Clara, died early, I think again about at the age of 8 or 10. I'm not sure. She's buried at Cheniere Tic, as is Raphael Jr. Okay, I have to remember, Raphael Sr., he came from Spain to New Orleans, married, and had a Raphael, and then died. And so we're dealing with Raphael Jr., Raphael E. Segura officially. They had son Sims, who was a trapper, rancher, former businessman, and these were all of them in the picture here, and we'll identify them for you later if you want. Gertrude, named after Gertrude, was a nun and a teacher. Isaac was a rancher, a farmer, a businessman, a trapper. Clara, as I said, died young. Alice was a teacher. My mother was named Alice too. George, a doctor. Solomon died fairly young of a medical emergency that he didn't get back to the mainland in time. I think it was appendix. Yeah. But he was a rancher, a trapper, a farmer. Margaret was a teacher. Jackson was a farmer and rancher. Walter, my dad, was a dentist. And Georgette, to my knowledge, I don't know if she ever taught or not.
I'm not sure.
We're not sure about that. And she was a homemaker, and I don't know whether she taught or not. But you can see the propensity to teaching among the women. Sims, the oldest, attended school at Cheniere Tic and was in school at St. Stanislaus in Mississippi when his father died. He came home to take care of his mother and brothers and sisters. Now we're getting too closer to Cheniere as it is, because that's where he went. In 1912, he married Zoe Sasak and lived on the first ridge at Cheniere. Now, when you have time, I want you to get up later and come to see this map that Dick Watkins put together. Now, these are all separate shots that he put together, very diligently, I might add. Okay, and so you can, on this map, you'll see the coast here, and if you look carefully, you'll see the three ridges I'm going to talk about soon. This was Cheniere Tic. The ridge continued on, but this was the area that was primarily settled by not only the Seguras, but all the other families there too. He married Zoe Sasak and had children, and among them Zoe and Amanda. Okay. They lived on the first ridge in a house. Well, the storm of 1918 came along and it blew everything on the first ridge away. So they, or first or second, I'm not sure, but it blew it away. It blew the house away. So guess, as a good son does, he goes and says, "Mom, can I come back home for a while?" Which he did. And so in the house that his mother had on the third ridge, there were 14 children and 3 adults in the house. That didn't last too long. You could imagine. So began what was to become, at that point, the Segura Health and Resort Hotel, because they couldn't all live in her house alone, so they built wings on the house. And as you can see, this is a model that Nora provided. At some instance it was used by somebody else, but it's a good model of the hotel, eventually became the hotel. The original house was here. They added a wing to each side and a dining room back here. So there were rooms. This is meant to represent screen porches here. And so there was rooms on this side, rooms on this side. The family lived here, and then the dining room and kitchen were over here. And so it was the original part of the hotel. Let's see. Now, in addition, okay, the hotel's physical, okay, in addition to this, there were, and you can see some pictures of this we have up, we're going to show them soon. There were cottages. In addition to the hotel, they had 5 cottages. And then they had, for those we're going to talk about a little later, day rooms. No, day, what now?
Light housekeeping.
Light housekeeping rooms, yes. And that was cheaper, you know, and that sort of thing.
What year was that?
That was, the hotel actually went into business in 1920. So it was, the peak period were the 20s and 30s for the hotel. In this period, roads were being built into the coastal areas. A road was proposed from Texas through Cameron Parish to Pecan Island and then to Cheniere. But when it got to Pecan Island, as we know, it turned north and of course went on to Kaplan. So there was no road built out there. To get out there, you had to go by boat. Its business peaked, I'm gonna talk more about that in a minute, but the business peaked in the 20s and 30s. The powers that be decided there was not gonna be any road. Okay. I've got all my pages mixed up. But I have it. After that period of time of the 20s and 30s, storm after storm pounded the coast and changed the beaches, changed the nature of the beaches from sand. At one point it was liquid mud, then it was sand again, soft sand instead of hard sand. It's changed it over time. The population increased, but the land was limited. There was only so much high land. So these people out there were having children, and many children in many cases, and where were they to go? What were they to do? There was no more land out there. So, and education was limited, although there was education, to a one-room schoolhouse with grades 1 through 8. What if they wanted more education? Now, to these people who lived at Cheniere, religion and education were important. There was a school and a chapel, St. Francis Xavier. Priests would come sporadically through the year, but every Sunday a rosary was said in the house of someone in the community. People kept in touch with the mainland via mail service, and there was a post office on the island. Eventually, the deterioration of the beach, the lack of access by road, lack of help and of land for new families, and limited educational opportunity result in the community moving inland into more settled areas. A closing of the hotel, it closed in 1939, so the 20s and the 30s were really peak of its existence. And then along with electricity, which finally reached Esther in 1950, really sealed the fate of the island then as a alternative settlement, as a permanent settlement. It didn't disappear then, but it sealed its fate, and the fate of the hotel, and really of the future of it too. Now, we're gonna take a journey. We're gonna go to Cheniere, okay?
Yeah.
Now,
You got a boat outside?
yeah, we have a boat. The Della D and the Martha White were two very well-known boats that went out there. The year is 1925. We see an ad in the Abbeville newspaper about Cheniere. Here it is.
Can everybody see you? Do we need to
Yeah,
get
can
the
you
lights?
Yes.
Can you dim the front?
We could dim a little
I
bit,
think the
yeah.
lights are, does anybody know how to dim?
What about those switches over there?
Yeah.
There we
okay,
go.
that's
Yeah, that's
good.
better.
Perfect.
Does this bother?
No.
Good,
No.
this is good, this is good.
Off to the Gulf Coast, bathing, fishing, dancing, good eating, horseback riding, tennis? Seems a mighty big claim there, I don't know about that. But look at the rates, it sounds great, over here, adults, rates per day, board and lodging, $150, children $75. Rates per week, and then you have the other, like I tell you, the light housekeeping rooms and things like that. There were other alternatives. So it sounds great and it's reasonable. I mean, look at all this entertainment going on out there. Supposedly, okay, so we catch a boat. Possibly, this is the Della D.
Let me go back.
Yeah, we're gonna go back a minute. Oh, there it is. This is the Della D, and the Martha White was the other one that picked up people all, sometimes Lafayette, Milton, Abbeville, and on out into the bay and into the canals to get to Cheniere, and we'll talk about canals later, or sometimes around the Gulf to get there too, okay? So we're going out there, we've heard about Cheniere Tic. It's a 5-mile long, narrow cheniere with 3 main ridges, resembling long fingers running east and west. The first ridge is the Gulf Coast shore, and you see it there. The water is to the left, and you'll see the first ridge there. The second ridge, with cottages, light housekeeping rooms, a dance hall, and a shower. Now, number 1 was the Coast Guard Tower. Number 2 was a cottage.
Can you read the numbers?
Yes. Number 3 was a dance hall, which you can't see very clearly. Number 4, coming from the beach, you had sand all over you, so you took a little shower there before you came back to the hotel to eat. And then the hotel is here, number 5, on the 3rd ridge. Now, remember, other families lived, remember this ridge was about 5 miles in length, and so there were many other families along this. In fact, you can see other homes on the right side of the picture going that way. A schoolhouse, there was a schoolhouse, a church, a cemetery, and far to the west end, a post office.
Y'all, that picture is this area right here, and if the photograph is taken from probably this point here, looking west, and you've got the first, second, and then the main or long ridge, which she says is about 5 miles long, but the picture was taken from here, and you're looking at this area right here. So maybe afterwards you
Afterward,
come
you
up
can
and
get,
take
I mean,
a
that's
look.
quite a picture of the coast there. Let's see, the post office, yeah.
One of my favorite, I lived in Cheniere Tic until I was 6. My parents sent me out to go to school to live with my grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Enos Frederick, who lived on the corner of Park and Port. So I lived with them and my Frederick relatives at that place. But when I lived on Cheniere Tic before that, one of our most exciting events was the mailboat arrival. The mailboat came once a week and brought treasures. The week before, the previous week, we could give the mailboat, it was Mr. Shell Morgan that drove the boat from Abbeville, in a coastal. And the previous trip, he would pick up our mail or our notes to our relatives. So our notes went to my grandfather and grandmother that lived in Abbeville and all my aunts and uncles, and they would send whatever we asked for. We had to buy the flour. We were pretty much self-sufficient, except the things that, flour, rice, those kind of things, we didn't grow. So we had to order it by the mailboat. And another, we would leave when we needed to go visit our relatives, or when Mama had a baby, we went on the mailboat and stayed in Abbeville until that task was done. And then we'd wait there a while and come back by mailboat. But our travel back and forth was mostly at the courtesy of the mailboat and the mailboat captain. And it was an exciting, as you can imagine, an exciting time. So Daddy would hitch up, and I don't know who the wagon belonged to, but we had this wagon that he hitched up 2 mules, Rise and Shine with their names, and we'd go to meet the mailboat with anticipation of what we were going to receive from Abbeville and our relatives, or if they were able to get our wish list purchased. So anyway, that was one of my very vivid memories of Cheniere Tic, as you can imagine, the excitement of the weekly visit to the post office. We lived all the way down on the east side, on the first ridge, and the post office was all the way down, like forever away, maybe 4 miles. But it took forever to get there, and it was, it was the highlight of the week. We went, the post office was all the way, I think it was probably on the 3rd ridge, all the way down to the McElhenney property, right. I'm not too sure that the mailboat did not come down the McElhenney Canal there. it was right.
Yeah,
close
I
to
didn't
that.
mention the McElhenney name, but he had property at the west end of the settled areas of the ridge, on the old west end. Now, if you'll look at the picture again, you'll see 1, 2, 3 ridges. You can tell by the oak trees on them and things like that. And in between is actually a marshy area that but they groomed it. I mean, we're gonna see the next picture. You're gonna see someone, I believe it is, oh, this was a picture of the hotel itself, and I'm not too sure who this is, in the picture, you know. But we can see the hotel itself there. Now, notice the lawn, the stuff like this, okay? Now, and the next one now. This was a diagram of the Segura Resort properties, and it's not necessarily done to scale or anything like that, but it gives you a good idea of how it was. Here at the bottom was the beach, and a pier that was built there, and then the first ridge had the tower. You can see the tower along the beach there. Second ridge had the 3 cottages to the left, the dance hall, 2 cottages here, the cemetery, the shower. Then you went back across that little marsh area to the main part of the property where the hotel is represented by that skewed cross there. And they had the barn, the chicken house, the store, the generator shed eventually, and the church and the schoolhouse further down the ridge, and the White's home right there. Now, it's not done to scale. The school and the church were further down, not quite that close as it looks. This is Sims and Zoe Segura, who initiated the hotel and ran it for the time it was open from 1920 to 1939, and continued to live out there after that. Came in, okay, for the time being anyway. So, Zoe and Sims, okay, the next one then? Yeah, I like this picture because you get an idea. In the background is the view of the hotel. Yeah, the background is the hotel. You see the big oak trees around it. Now, they had built up a walkway to come across that marshy area around there, but they kind of took care of the marshy areas to make it not too rough looking or anything like that. So you had access, you see, from the hotel onto the second ridge and then onto the first ridge. Okay, the next picture, I think we have another picture. I just want to show you how manicured it was developed. How manicured the land was. You see clear ground, you see the trees, the buildings, and things like this. For my age, okay, this was all gone. I mean, for the most part, it was gone. Okay, one more we have the resort property, I believe. These are the lighthouse keeping rooms. People in it. Oh yeah, look at, the guests brought their own bedding and supplies. They bring sometimes chickens, live chickens, so that they'd have food to eat along during the time they stayed there. And they brought everything themselves to stay in these rooms. Okay, and then I think we have a picture of a cottage too. Yeah, these are the West Side cottages, the 5-room cottages between the 2-room cottages there. Okay. When we were on the Della D and the Martha White, we traveled to the island by canal or by swinging around from the open Gulf. We are met at the landing with the hotel wagon and are transported to the hotel where we get to our respective rooms or cottage. I don't know what the next one is, but maybe it's time for it. I can't remember right now. Oh, yeah, this is coming up, yeah. Okay, we saw the map by Zoe and everything else. Life was not easy on the island, but people and their families thrived. The following is from Zoe Lynch's book, quotation. I realize more and more every day how lucky we were to have been born and raised on Cheniere Tic. We were and still are a close-knit family. Our life on Cheniere was filled with happy times. There were no telephones announcing gloom and doom in those days. We took the weather as it came, rough or calm, cold or warm. As children, all we had to worry about was doing our chores and studying lessons. By 1926, there was a generator, which translated to one light bulb for each cottage, or each room. And they did have some running water, but not bathroom facilities, that was still outside. The dining room served an average of 40 to 100 guests a day. It depended on the time of year and everything. They didn't all come at one time. They came in shifts. And the boys, now remember, there was multi-generations there of the same age. Segura's children were the same age as some of the younger Rayfield Segura children. So their uncles were sometimes their own age, oftentimes. Well, the boys were the food gatherers. They would go and get stuff, and the girls served in the dining room. Again, from Zoe's book, we had a Victrola phonograph and many records set up in the dining room. We enjoyed music very much. Whenever we had time, we would put a record on to play while we waited on tables. Sometimes elderly gentlemen would ask one of us to dance. Mom and Dad taught us to always be polite to our visitors, so we danced with them. When the dance was over, we picked up our trays and continued to serve meals. All the food was cooked on a wood-burning stove in the kitchen. Food was actually very plentiful, except for the staples of things like flour and rice. There was fruit orchards, orange, pears, grapes. I know I'm missing some, although there was pecans, there was watermelon and cantaloupe in the fields. Vegetables were plentiful in large gardens. Everyone had a garden. There were chickens, ducks, geese, turkey, pigs, and sheep. The boys hunted and trapped animals and seined with a 600-foot seine on a more or less daily basis to provide the seafood, and they also collected the oysters. You know, they would go and get the oysters. And sometimes, by accident, a huge stingray, okay? There was some, they didn't eat that, I don't think. This is, I had to include this. This is a picture of my father, Walter, and this has to be Uncle Tom, right?
Yeah.
It has to be, yeah. Again, my mother's brother was named Tom, and I have to tell you this story. My father and Tom Dunn were in school together at Loyola. And Tom was from Dallas, Texas. So he says, oh, well, you need to come over with me, to come home with me for a while when I go to a holiday to visit. So he did. And there he met Alice Dunn. And guess what? That was history, okay? Roads were graded, by the way. Roads were graded. Oh, this is the Model T truck. That was the first vehicle, I believe, on the island. And it was used for a variety of things. Sometimes, to transport visitors, but they also use wagons sometimes. And then also to pull a 600-foot seine, you better have, you couldn't have the truck in the water, but you had the truck on the edge, and you had the people in the water holding it and pulling at the same time. And to pull it in, too, that it had to be quite a job. But they had a grader. I think it's the next one. No, okay, this is fascinating. Not only did they have cars, but guess what? They also had visitors who came in planes and landed on the beach or fields, and then there were fields cleared enough to land on, which to me is amazing. Again, amazing to me. I don't remember, I never saw it in that state, This is John Lynch. This is Nora's father, husband of Zoe Lynch. And can you speak about him for a minute?
Daddy was a research biologist. He taught survival in the service, and he attended 2 colleges in Rhode Island. One was his regular college, the other one, he was so interested in the subject he had chosen that they let him attend anyway. He took one subject, and he just wanted to learn. And so he went on to be a research biologist and worked with fish and wildlife. He was a pilot, counted ducks and geese. He went to Canada all the time to.
How did he get down to Louisiana?
He came down with Ted O'Neill and some of the others to work with fish and wildlife.
Oh, fish and wildlife, yeah. because Ted O'Neill was.
And
was-
Aunt Amanda introduced Mom and Mom and Daddy.
But I mean, you know, that must have cut quite a figure, flying in, landing on the beach in a pasture, you know, I mean.
These the aerial pictures.
Oh, yes, thank you, Hilda. This is the guy who took the aerial photo of the 3 ridges there.
And on one of the pictures, he signed the back of it, it was a postcard, and he said, Nora, can you see where Grandma lives? So if I could find the hotel.
Sweet, that's sweet.
The dance hall was there on the 2nd ridge and was popular especially on the weekends with music and dancing. Guests enjoyed the entertainment and were joined by local families from the island. So it wasn't just the guests at the dance hall, it was also the families who lived on the island. They did have some people who were musicians who could play and who did. Now, I'm told that there were some refreshments on the inside of the dance hall, but no alcohol was sold on the inside of the dance hall. But guess what? There was alcohol outside the dance hall. I just had to go outside and find it. Again, these are all tales I'm told.
Miss Alice,
That was the notes I heard.
I read once in some research, it might have been the lady who did the thesis, that if you got to Cheniere Tic and you were at the dance hall and the hotel was full, you could pay to sleep where you danced.
You could, when they had no full of people, and there were no rooms, no anything, you could sleep on the hall dance floor, but you had to wait till the dance was over. Oh, yeah, that's.
You had to
that's-
fight the mosquitoes.
Let's see. Let's go, we have, let's go back one.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, this is a group of young people. Okay, now, okay, it's 1920s and 30s. What kind of shirts are these? Those are linen shirts.
Oh.
Well, you know, they're not our materials today. They have to be armed. Bow tie. We have a lot of pictures of people in suits too out there, maybe summer suits. But we figured, Hilda and I figured that this group had to be going to the dance hall because look how they're dressed. I mean, they're dressed very nattily, I think.
Mama used to always say that Uncle Tanny always wore his white, all dressed up. And they'd have to iron his clothes and then he'd go to the beach to entertain the women.
So you can imagine, I mean, again, as Zoe said, life was hard, but it was still enjoyable. Now, swimming at the beach was a popular, one of their mostly their main activity. You can see in that upper left picture, the men weren't gonna give up a game of cards, I guess, and so they had played a table in the water and played. And then a group of swimmers here and somebody on the pier. Swimming was very popular, and but that wasn't the only thing the swimming was valued for. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, go back
That's
one,
St.
please.
Georgette, Uncle.
Okay.
Just a second.
The youngest of the Raphael Segura children was Georgette. And this is a picture of her on the right with her husband Jake Boudreaux.
Very handsome man.
Yeah, very handsome man.
Wow.
She wasn't bad looking either though.
Huh?
She wasn't bad looking either.
Oh.
Okay, but there was another draw to the beach. Let's see that, oh, here it is.
Pure.
While swimming on the beach was popular, for some Gulf water and beach sand were valued for their curative powers. People were buried in the sand, and they would make a ditch around them, as it were, and then they'd pour salt water over them, and it would flow into the ditch, but you were being soaked in salt water and sand. People found it relaxing and thought it healed the mind, body, and skin. Now, there were others who went in, later there was mud baths too, and people thought this was a very curative aspect of the beach also. Do we have a picture? Well, this one's in the mud, look at here.
Yeah.
Okay, you can see him in the mud. Okay. A school was built early on, that grades 1 through 8 for childhood education. And the kids had chores both before and after going to school. those who wanted to further their education had to move inland with relatives for the school year. Summers were spent back at Cheniere Tic. Some who attended the school in Perry or Abbeville had to make half years. My father taught when he was in high school, didn't he do that, Mike? He made half years?
You had to be, your attendance had to be so many days attendance. So like, it was like, even in 5th and 6th grade, they get like, because they'd leave at Thanksgiving and come back the 1st of March, they get a credit for half a year of school. So he said like they were in the 5th grade, then the 5th and a half grade, then the 6th grade, and finally they just said, okay, if you pass the test, you pass the class. And his next older brother, Jackson, he did that and missed a lot of school and ended up being a valedictorian of his class. So I don't know if that reflects on the other students in his class or him. Which one of that crowd you talking about? How do you do that?
Yeah, you had to do the trapping, that trapping was a large part of the situation here. And so, you were gone. And, I liked, Hilda, your dad was not, your dad was involved in the trapping too, huh?
Sure.
Okay. And did they trap mainly in the Cheniere area, or was it in the Esther area too?
No, Cheniere and Belleau.
Belleau and Cheniere, okay. So that's where the varmints were, not varmints, that's where the fur-bearing animals were. And so, that's where they went, yeah, Mike?
A lot of them, they probably at times had 5 or 6 different camps. At Vermilion, at my Uncle Sim's at Mulberry, and they'd have 5 or 6 camps, and they'd always, Sims and them always happened to have a family member at each camp to keep the other employee type, they were trapping on shares. And to keep the other people who was also employed trapping for them from bootlegging too much fur, stealing too much fur from, so they always had somebody in the family to kind of watch and make sure the others weren't running off with all the profits.
Well, that continued.
What kind of animals, what kind of fur?
Muskrat, muskrat at this time, neutral after 1940, but muskrat, coons, mink, otters, a lot of the same things that, there's no money in it right now, nobody traps it.
Bobcat. Anything you could catch in a trap.
Okay, so it was quite something, but then we get into the 30s, and of course, the Depression is big time everywhere in the country. And it increased, costs kept increasing, and there was little money to be had. The hotel closed in 1939. World War II changed things. That was, of course, December 41. For the residents, as it did for the whole country. It took precedence almost over everything and everyone. A Coast Guard tower was built overlooking the beach, and the Swamp Angels, a contingent of Coast Guard members at Cheniere Tic, patrolled the beach. Among them were 3 of Sim's children, Anthony, Ralph, and Lloyd. They were three of them. There were more than just 3 though. There was a contingent of them. And in Zoe's letters in this book, that her daughter included, there's, gotta go cook. We got all the men to cook for today, and that sort of thing. They still had at times to cook. They were supporting the war effort and everything else, and they were cooking for the swamp.
We lived very close to the Coast Guard tower, and when, as a special treat, they had running water at the Coast Guard tower, and we were allowed to every now and then have a shower. So I remember that, and I remember wanting to climb that tower as a child, but of course I never was able to do that. And then when I was old enough as an adult, it was rotten and I couldn't climb it, so.
Yeah.
I lost my chance, yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't do it after a while. The death knell to a permanent settlement at Cheniere was the coming of electricity to Esther, and the other mainland areas in the 1950s. Some continued to live on the island, and many went sporadically to take care of cattle, harvest fruit, fish, and hunt. Other natural forces, though, served to erase any settled presence on the island. Forces like Hurricane Audrey in 1957, really, the hotel, if you look at the pictures in the back as we're ending, and we have one here, this is more of what it looked like. I mean, pieces of it were washed away of the hotel, and other places, of course, were washed too. And then, of course, the other one, in 2005, Rita just totally wiped it. There was one camp, I think, that survived along the ridge.
The one that I had started.
Yeah, she started one, and it was not washed off the ridge. And that was remarkable.
It was a stated place. The others either washed into the marsh or went off the blocks, and the blocks went through the floor.
Now, some noise was made about a road to Cheniere in the 70s and 80s, but no road was ever built. Most of the land on the island was privately owned, not public, and almost no one wanted to sell their land or make it public. Also, making a road through the marsh was horribly expensive and just exorbitant, and no one thought they could afford it. Family members and guests still visit the island. In fact, I want Helen to talk about a camp that you visit quite often.
Yeah, my son-in-law and my daughter built a new camp after.
And they had a camp before, right?
We had a camp before.
Rita.
Then Rita took it, floated off to almost the Audubon over there. So we built a new.
Good way.
It's a small camp. It's nothing like the McElhaney's built a nice camp.
I have not seen their post-Rita camp. I have not seen it. I don't know what it's like.
But,
Well, there's a camp that's raised.
yes.
It's raised. It has screened porches and things like that. It's very nice. That one
Yeah.
I've been in once or
And
two.
we get with a generator, which isn't a big generator, but it does the job. We have AC and all,
Mhm.
so.
And Mike, who was here and is gone now, has also built a camp. He built, my dad started and he finished the camp before Rita, and it floated away to
Where the hotel had gone.
where the hotel had
It's
gone.
just to the right of the hotel as
Yeah.
you're looking at it right here.
Yeah, and so Mike went back and built another one. So he's out there, and there are some others out there. I don't know who all is out there, who all has camps. Now, Nora has.
Rodney and Rodney.
They redid Uncle Ralph's.
Okay.
And they're using it. IW has a camp, Hilda and them have a camp. McElhaney redid theirs. Danny and Julie.
Julie, yeah, they got a great spot.
And then Uncle Lloyd's shed by their canal, they still have that
Mhm.
for their storage.
Mhm.
And they plan on rebuilding where Uncle Lloyd's house was.
Which is now high ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing
No
how
joke.
Rita changed the beach, where her camp, her dad's camp was, house was high up on the ridge to start off with, but for some reason, the way the wind blew,
We had no damage through all the storms. We had no damage for Audrey, no damage anytime, anywhere at our house until Rita, and it just wiped it off. There was one PVC pipe sticking up. Nothing.
but the land was.
But the land, it dumped 3 feet of sand on top of our already high land. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it really
Just go
was.
along right up next, you know.
It just
Unbelievable.
brought it all up. So, since then, the island, the ridge has reverted to its natural state. They say nature abhors a vacuum, and it's certainly true. From the pictures you saw today, you wouldn't recognize the neatly trimmed resort hotel grounds. That's why these old pictures are so exceptional. They are indeed from another time and world. There are still beautiful oak trees and a sandy shore at the base of the ridges. And as I said, there are still some family camps on Cheniere. It's hard, it seems, to let go of a piece of your heart, you know? There's something there.
You go all the time.
Now, Nora goes more often than I, for sure.
We go all the time.
Yeah. her children and grandchildren go. You know, and
And
they're on,
great-grandchildren.
and they're on the beach, and they have a truck out there, and they ride to the beach. Mike has a truck, you send them out there, and, you know, I hope that you can make them work when you go out there. And you can get around fairly well, because there were roads. I want you to check out some of the paintings like you see over here. The roads were developed. There was actually a grader that graded the roads, and they cut back the trees so there'd be sunshine to dry out the roads and things like that. And those roads are still evident to some degree. You know, and so that's what Cheniere is all about. It's really a very special place. Could be mosquitoes like you would not believe, okay?
The flies.
And deer flies, oh yes, the deer flies, yes. Ooh, they can be tough.
How did they handle the mosquitoes and the deer flies back in the 20s and 30s?
Well, in the first place, it was clear, the land was clear, so there wasn't that the mosquitoes, the wind from the Gulf blew them away.
It's true.
Yes, but then with the cattle, they burned, they had like pots that they put diesel in it with I think Spanish moss, either that or the grass sacks we called them, and they burned that. They hung them in the trees to keep the mosquitoes off the cattle, but I don't remember mosquitoes living there. I don't remember anybody talking about the mosquitoes except for the cattle. At night, there were no mosquitoes in the daytime to me. I don't remember that, but and at night you stayed in. That was how we dealt with that. You didn't go outside after dusk.
It's true even now, though, on the Gulf Coast, the breeze is still there. Having gone out with my father and some friends at one point, we were at his camp, and mosquitoes were pretty bad. But we got to the shoreline, along the beach.
What year are we talking about?
When I lived there, like
When the mosquitoes weren't bad.
well, I'm not saying they weren't bad, but they didn't bother us because we felt the breeze from the
Yeah.
Gulf at all times.
Their
It
house
was not,
was-
you didn't go through a
They were close right on the beach almost.
And we
That
didn't
place, there was
travel.
a clear shot too, there wasn't no trees in front.
Right.
so
Yeah,
the
that
breeze
was
could
a
blow
lot
through it.
clearer.
Right.
And right now, I mean, that's one of the things about right now, it's so bad. And it was bad at times there too. But I know, I mean, from
Yeah,
other people
right.
saying things. But they had ways of dealing with it, and land was more clear than it is now. Right now, it's just chock-a-block. And so
Overgrown, and so there's places for
until
the,
you get to the coast,
Beach.
I mean, the beach.
yeah.
Now, one thing I failed to mention is there's still a cemetery out there that's been maintained by groups of family members who go out there we used to go out about once a year. And you can imagine that there were only a few of the cement, or what do you call it, graves, you know, the very few. I remember Grandpa Segura had one, Raphael has one, Clara's there.
Right.
And, by the way, Amanda Hanks was buried out there. She's the only modern person who's been buried out there.
So
But,
Rita didn't wash all of that away?
excuse me?
Rita didn't
Well,
wash the
let me tell
graves
you
away?
what, okay, look at the graves. They're made out of sand, and there were so many shells, they just put the shells in there to keep them in. But you can imagine a hurricane force would flatten all that out. So the next time the family went out to
Pull the weeds and you hold.
pull the weeds and hold the
hill
sand up and put the shells back
back.
where it might be. You know, this is no, yes,
You have a slide, I mean, one out on the map, where the ridge is actually located, Cheniere Tic, or what the.
Yeah, when we're finished now, you can come up and look at the map. This is a good one right here, because you see 1, 2, 3, and there's a third ridge, which is the highest point that keeps going. It really is. It's the map
If I had gone another mile to the west, we would be at Freshwater City, Freshwater Locks, if you're familiar with where that is. So you're east of Freshwater City, Freshwater Locks.
So this is just considered the main ridge where you can
Yes,
see the remnants
that
of.
is the main ridge. But the photograph that she showed the three is from here, and it showed this one. This is one, this is two, but the main.
Okay, good. bibliographies in case you